CSI and to Move On and all the groups, CWA and all the groups that helped put this together tonight. You know, we're all here tonight. Ms. Lane is here tonight. But once again, in a participatory democracy, the Republican conservative candidate is not here tonight. And this marks what, Mr. Lane? Five debates that our Republican candidate has decided wasn't worthy of his presence. And this really is just such disrespect to the people of the 11th Congressional District that here he is thinking that he wants to go to Washington to represent us, but yet doesn't have the courtesy to come and answer questions and face us. So I think that's something that needs to be said. Both Mr. Lane and I have mentioned it. But he is here tonight in a certain way. He's here through his tracker. He sends a tracker here and in fact, this tracker has been to every debate, so congratulations. Your candidate hasn't been here, but you've been here to every debate. And what he does is he records what we say so that the counter debate can review it, but he's not willing to be here himself. So maybe we should change that to tracker up there with that name up there. Let me just quickly say that for those of you who don't know me, I've been a legislator for 18 years. I've been in the state senate and represented part of Staten Island in the state senate, and then in the city council since 2003. I'm the most senior member of the city council, and certainly my 18 years as a legislator will serve me well when I go down to Washington, because if you think about it, the very day after the election, when the vote is certified, the person who gets elected gets sworn in right away. There's no downtime. So as soon as the election is certified a winner, that person gets sworn in and goes right down to Washington and has to start performing. So I would think that someone with 18 years experience as a legislator, I know how to operate, I know how to hit the ground running. And there are things happening in Washington right now that we need to work on immediately. So when you look at someone with 18 years experience versus the others with no experience, I think that's a factor you need to weigh in your decision. Let me just say that if you look at the Washington scene right now, there are a lot of things that are happening that are not good for Americans, but particularly for New Yorkers. This budget, the budget resolution that the Republicans passed in the House of Representatives about a month ago, is an anti-New York City budget. It's an anti-New York City budget. If it were to become reality, New York City would lose $13.4 billion in federal revenue to New York City. That would be a tremendous hit, and certainly something that we could not let happen. So, but that's and they're playing that game. They're serious about it because it would affect transportation, it would affect healthcare, it would affect education in this city. And one of the things they don't talk about is raising the minimum wage. And Mr. Lane and I have both talked about one of the first things we need to do in this country to help those who are struggling the most is raise the minimum wage. In my case, to $13 and tie it to inflation, and that's something we can do immediately. We also have to protect seniors. Right now, there are proposals on the table in Washington that would change Medicare, change Medicaid, and change Social Security for the worse. So we have to protect those seniors. We have more seniors in our district in the 11th than anywhere else in the city of New York. So we have to make sure we protect seniors. And then the last thing I would say to you is that one of the things we need to do is bring back more federal money to our district. Right now, the 11th Congressional District doesn't get any federal money, none. And we need to do that through the Highway Trust Fund. We need to do that so that we can create jobs through infrastructure rebuilding, and we can do that. We can build the light rails. We can build more, have more ferry lines. We can do that with federal money. Right now, we get none, and you need a Congress member who's going to be able to go down there and bring that money home. So I thank you for your presence here tonight. Look forward to answering your questions, and thank you Thank you for giving us this opportunity to speak to you.
Next, I'd like to introduce James Lane, the Green Party candidate. Mr. Lane.
Thank you very much. Everyone hear me? So I won't go into the, despicable Dan Donovan not being here today. Because it is. It's really shows he has no regard for this process of hearing from the community and what he will do to represent you. He's just going to run a $600,000 political campaign that's just going to be internet ads and banners and signs all over the place and not have to answer to anything. So we're here tonight to share our visions and talk to you about it. So my name is James Lane, and I am your Green Party candidate for this district. I'm married, my wife's a social worker, my son's a public school student, and we live in Brooklyn. And 15 years ago, I joined the Green Party because I imagined a better society for our people. The Green Party has 4 basic pillars to it. It's for grassroots democracy, ecological wisdom, social justice, and nonviolence. And these are the building parts for a sustainable society that we can have here, especially in this district. I mean, one of the things that rings really solidly with me is the troubles that we're having on the North Shore right now with police brutality. We've seen last year Eric Garner being choked to death on camera. And the people responsible for that got off scot-free. There was no indictment on even a wrongful death. The EMS people didn't do anything to help save him. And this all happened under Dan Donovan's watch as he's returning. And he'll argue that, well, it's not our job to indict. But if the whole world's watching this video and they see somebody dying, saying they can't breathe 11 times, somebody should be held accountable. So that's one of the reasons. So that's one of the reasons I threw myself into this race. And as Mr. Gentile says, yes, he's the only one with 18 years experience in legislative, but I've been working for 30 years in leadership roles, as a manager, director, vice president. And so I know how to manage people and get things done. So I might not have the legislative experience, but I knew how to bring in people that can help get the job done. And I like to roll up my sleeves and get dirty too if I need to. So I will be able to hit the ground running just as well. Thank you. So, one of the things too is I'm not a career politician. I'm a political activist. Like I said, I like to roll up my sleeves, get the job done. And this is what I've been doing for the past 15 years, talking about our electoral problems that we've had where, on election day, people might want to vote for me and Vinny, but because of this current process, they only are able to vote for one person. One of the things that we've been pushing for in the Green Party is for ranked choice voting. So you can vote for me first and vote for Vinny if you are tied to his party. You could do that too. But these are all the things, and people talk about past elections where, the vote could have gone either way, and we've seen nothing by the major parties to do any kind of overhaul to this system. And this is the most crucial part for any participatory decision making. You're electing us to represent you in Congress, and it doesn't stop once we get elected. You're going to be in the offices asking for us to do things, and you want to make sure that you have somebody that has the honesty, integrity, and compassion to do these jobs. We don't know where Dan Donovan sits with this. So just keep in mind that we need to have a huge voter turnout on May 5th against Dan Donovan. So one of the other things I want to talk about is the current two-party system. With the Greens, we don't accept corporate donations. We've known that from the beginning that if you have a politician and he accepts corporate money, a lot of his decision isn't going to be for the people, but it's for the people that have funded his pockets. And we saw as a problem right away, and none of our candidates, our party does not accept corporate donations. And what this leads to is we've seen with the current elected officials that we have, is that they failed our neighborhoods, they failed our communities. Right now we've had Superstorm Sandy that's ravished homes in Staten Island, about 2,000 or so. With FEMA and the Build It Back program, only 200 have been rebuilt. And as I mentioned before, we have this police brutality issue, and nobody really coming to light to sort of stand up for this thing and ask for immediate change, to ask for an independent investigation and prosecution in these situations. And that's why we are in this race. We are the voice of the people in this race to fight for these issues. And some of the things I'd like to talk about as far as the funding that we need. One of the things that's really crucial to my campaign is we're talking about a Green New Deal. And what that is, that's a jobs program. That's what we call a job creator and a planet saver. And what we're going to do with that program is we're going to build infrastructure that's going to tear us away from the fossil fuel industry. Right now, a lot of people just think that fossil fuels and fracking and pipelines are the way to create jobs in this country. But it might create jobs in the short term, but in the long term, what it does is just increases greenhouse emissions and creates stronger storms that we've seen with Superstorm Sandy and other storms, earthquakes and such. And so what we are pushing for the Green Party is have a Green New Deal, something that works to create more solar farms, more wind farms, offshore wind farms, hydrothermal. And we can do this all by 2030, but we need people in Congress that have the integrity to actually do it. Right now we don't see that in Congress, and that's why I'm running. The other thing that we're looking for too is a $15 an hour minimum wage. A lot of people say, well, how are you going to get that? We're going to get the money to fund that. We'll talk about that as the night goes on, but it's possible. But it just takes one person to start it. Over in Seattle, we had a socialist candidate that ran the city council. They enacted a $15 an hour minimum wage, and then transitioned down to Portland doing one. And then some other cities are doing it now too. So across the country, this fight for $15 now is actually a real fight, and people are making it happen. And there are ways that you can make it happen and nobody feels the burden for it. Because at the end of the day, in New York, even if you made $15 an hour, you can't really survive. That's only $30,000 a year after taxes, and then you have rent, the bridge, all the transportation fees are just going up and up and up. That's barely a living wage. And so in New York, we probably need a $20 minimum wage. But as Vinny said, we'll talk about that as the night goes on. And the most important thing is we're talking about, the funds for our roadways and such, and light rail. This Green New Deal will be part of that to rebuild this infrastructure. But also the most important thing is to tax our corporations and the wealthiest 1% in our country, the fair share. If I make $100, I have to pay about $30 in taxes. If one of these corporations or the richest 1% makes $100, they only have to pay maybe $3. That's not fair. If they were being taxed fairly, the money that we're collecting from them could actually fund a lot of these projects that we're talking about right now. Can fund our roads, can fund our schools, can fund a better healthcare system. We could actually have a Medicare for all healthcare system. That's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see a Medicare for all healthcare system that has everybody in, nobody out. No, you have to have Medicare Part B, D, E, or whatever as an additional coverage. It should just all be covered. It's a human right. So, like I said, I'll cut this short because I know we're running a little bit late. But so what I'm asking everybody to do is think about what we could do if we think outside the box. Look at not voting along the way that you usually vote. Think about voting towards somebody that's talking about a way to get to a green economy, to a green future. So that's why I'm asking everybody here to vote for me on the Green Party line on May 5th. That's it. Thank you.
I think as moderator, I have the responsibility or the executive decision-making to be able to choose what the first question is going to be for both candidates to address. And it's reflected. Yes.
Council Member Gentile is to lead by 8, so we can ask the questions to him and then to Mr. Lane after the same questions.
Okay.
Okay.
So ask with Mr. Gentile first.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. Okay.
As long as we get the same question.
It's actually the same exact question. I'm just going to ask for each of you to respond to it, okay? And it's reflected in some of the questions that came in from the audience on the same topic. All right. So as Tip O'Neill, the former Speaker of the House, once famously said, all politics is local, right? Which encapsulates the principle that politicians must appeal to the everyday concerns of those who elect them into office. Those personal issues, rather than big and intangible ideas, are often what voters care most about. And in light of that, both candidates, if you could please speak to the issue of the distrust of police stemming from the recent cases of police brutality and the excessive force which has become a polarizing subject on the national level, and in particular on the local level after the grand jury decision not to indict a police officer in the death of Eric Garner. I have quotes from both of you, and I'd like for each of you to respond. Mr. Gentile, you were quoted in a recent meeting with the Staten Island Advance editorial board as saying, quote, "I have a vision to bring communities together and to treat all communities with fairness under the law." And Mr. Lane, your quote also in a Staten Island Advance article, "We need to ensure that our police protect the well-being and safety of all residents, treating them with dignity and respect. The police, like everyone else, need to be held accountable for their actions. I reject policing techniques that end up targeting people based on their color or economic status. I want a city where my son does not have to worry about dealing with the police due to his race." So what I guess what I would like to ask is, how would each of you see these changes occur?
So let me just say that first of all, secrecy always breeds suspicion, right? And in this case, the secrecy of the grand jury minutes and the fact that we don't know what happened, we don't know how the testimony went down, we don't know how the officer testified, what questions he was asked, what answers he gave, what type of follow-up questions there were, we don't know that. So when there is a controversy like the death of Eric Garner, one of the things you want to have is to take that secrecy and suspicion away. And I have called for the district attorney, Dan Donovan, to join me in asking the court to release the grand jury minutes, at the very least, release the grand jury minutes of the police officer. Because right now, part of the reason for secrecy is to protect a defendant from, in the event that the defendant is not indicted. The reason for the secrecy is so that the defendant would keep his name in the community. But that doesn't apply here because we all know who the defendant is in this case, right? It's the police officer. So there's, from that perspective, there's no reason to keep the grand jury minutes secret. And we can also redact the names and addresses of witnesses if the court were to do so and release all of the grand jury minutes. So I have called for that, and I am pleased that the appeal on the release of the minutes is moving forward on a quick basis. So that really is, and I was prosecutor for 11 years, and we supervise the grand jury, so I know what happens in the grand jury, and there is no reason, based on what I know, not to release these grand jury minutes. That would help a lot in reducing and relieving some of the tension between the police and the public that we see now. That suspicion, because of the secrecy, is fueling a lot of the tension that we might see between police and community. Beyond that, what I said was that we need to build a broader coalition of people like pastors, youth groups, and after-school activities, and that's where a Congress member comes in to help with some of the funding, so that there is more interaction between the community and the police, and it's not just a fact of patrolling the streets. It's the interaction and the familiarity with the community that the police must have in order to have some kind of understanding of what happens on the streets. So that's my proposal, to bring more federal money so we can do programs like that, build broader coalitions so that we have a better understanding, and when we get into situations like we have with Eric Garner, I think it would be fewer of those. But in those cases, I would say that the public has a right to know how the grand jury acted. And that's how it is.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if we're going to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so my campaign is calling for independent investigation and prosecution in these cases. That means taking these cases out of the district. Right now, you have a cop that'll do something bad, and the district attorney that's overseeing this grand jury, and they might be friends. So a friend's not going to indict a friend. So that's why we've been calling to bring these cases out of that jurisdiction. You know, the most important thing that we're talking about here is the secrets and lies in this grand jury. I mean, the fact that the grand jury transcripts aren't being released, like you said, you can redact information, say witness one, defendant one, whatever, and release what's in there. And it makes you very suspicious on what was the questioning, what was the scenario, and people were pretty much forced into saying, well, no, under that scenario, I don't think there was a problem. You know, one of the things I would like to do, and you know, and Mr. Gentile will probably chime in because I don't have legislative experience, but there should be a way that we can get into these precincts. There should be a way that if you have a community complaints review board and they see like maybe 300 complaints in a week about a particular precinct, there should be a way that you could get in there and say, okay, we need to do an investigation on this precinct. And we need to look at the heads of these precincts and get the heads out of it, because it's obviously these cops are acting on what their bosses are telling them. A lot of these cops, you know, they're new, they're rookies or whatever, and they're just acting by what their bosses are telling them. I know. I've been in the streets and protests. I can see them. They'll have the best discipline in the world when they're told to, and they can have the worst indiscipline when they're just let loose. And so I would like to go in there and do a serious investigation and make sure that we don't have cops in there that are doing wrong things, and that their bosses aren't telling them to do bad things, and they're not using the community as a revenue source by targeting them for tickets and fines to fund whatever, you know, municipal budgets they need to fulfill. Because that's what's happening right now, and these are the kinds of things I would like to change.
Okay, thank you for both. I'm going to continue with this debate format for just a bit. I'm going to be taking some questions from the audience, and since we're at a college, I'd like the next question to be, this is in regard to student loan debt. The question is, what are you going to do to reduce the student loan debt? So if you could, each of you could take that question.
I've talked about this on the campaign trail a lot, because we see student loan debt getting larger and larger and larger, and more students not able to pay off this debt and default on their student loans. And part of that reason is because colleges have skyrocketed tuitions over the years with reckless abandon, really, because they have no skin in the game, so to speak. And what I propose is to put a brake on these tuition rates by requiring, by federal law, requiring colleges to share the risk of federally issued student loans. And by sharing the risk, these colleges will then think twice about allowing students to pile on so much debt that they're not going to be able to pay it when they get out of school. And they will think about that in setting their tuition rates, because now they have skin in the game. And so I think that's a direct way that the federal government can put a brake on these tuition rates. And we'll do another thing also. It will also encourage and give incentive to colleges to be sure that the majority of their students graduate with jobs, that they have jobs when they graduate. Because if they don't have a job and their student loans come due, that's when people default, and the colleges would have to share in that risk. So making colleges have skin in the game is a way to bring tuition rates down and to make college more affordable for students.
Okay, thank you.
And I've always been a fan of, you know, having a time when you can go to a school and it would cost you just a little bit of money, or it would be free. And we don't have that anymore. A lot of these universities are just a for-profit system. And what it does is just put students in debts that they have to take about 30 to 50 years of their lives paying off, if they're lucky enough to get a job, as you mentioned. A lot of people are changing their majors and going into carpentry or whatever because they said the original major that they picked will not be able to pay off their student debts. So what I would like to do is, one, drop the interest rates on these debts so it's something manageable to do, because it's just ridiculous that we're using these students to fund this institution of high finance loans. The other thing is, we can get money to build our free and public education systems by cutting budgets in other areas. Like our military budget, for example, is through the roof. It doubled during the times of the Barack Obama era, which is frightening. We don't need to go to other countries and bomb people with trillions of dollars of money when we could actually use that money here for our healthcare, for our education systems, and for transportation, and for building a green economy. So those are a couple of things I would like to change.
And I don't know about you, but I'm still paying my student loans.
It's a question of priority.
All right, we're going to continue with we're taking a few more questions from the pile, and maybe we'll have an opportunity to open it up for some questions from the audience directly. So the next question, what are you going to do to strengthen unions? What can you do to strengthen unions? And maybe a follow-up question to that would be, how do you see the role of unions in today's economy?
Well, it's interesting when you say strengthening the unions. So that could be many things. Unions are pretty strong right now. There's just problems with the way that some of them are being run. And that's something that has to be handled within the actual union structure. One of the things you could do is create legislation to protect union workers, or create legislation to protect the formation of unions. Well, this is one of the things that we talk about with TPP, for example. You know, in TPP, around the world, you're getting non-union workers under the worst worker rights, laws, and if those workers want to form a union, they face death. There's not like, oh, you can't work here. No, you die. And so, as far as strengthening unions, it would just be a protection for people to form unions would be a good thing. Because, as I mentioned with our 15 now, we do want 15 now, and a lot of those workers are asking for a union. Because even if you're getting $15 an hour as a minimum wage, there's no guarantee that you'll be able to work 40 hours at that job. So what people might try to do is like, well, we'll pay you $15, but you can only work once a week. You can't live on that. So now you have to have 5 jobs. And so that's what we would like to do, is strengthen the unions, meaning as far as what a union employee can be empowered to do, or can stand up for themselves. So those are the things that we'd like to talk about.
You build the economy from the middle out, and the middle out is where unions are most helpful and do the most for the people. And that's why we have to protect unions. And there are 2 bills in Congress now that day one that I was in Congress, I would join as a sponsor. One of them would actually prohibit the right to work laws that we see being created around the country, in Wisconsin and in I believe in some other, Arkansas I think has got another right to work law that's going through. Those are the laws that hurt the organizing effort of unions, and I would The other bill is a very interesting bill, because this would really cement the ability of unions to organize, and it's a bill that would actually make union organizing, the right to organize, a civil right. It would take the same kind of civil rights that you would get in the Civil Rights Act and apply it to union organizing, so that if there were attempts to stop union organizing in some way, that would be a violation of the civil rights of those who are attempting to organize. And then you would have those kinds of remedies that you would have under the Civil Rights Act, you would have in the labor area as a violation of civil rights against labor organizing. I would support that also.
I just would like to sort of comment here, just in this in-between moment. A nice round of applause to both of the candidates for being, we're asking them very direct questions, and they're giving us very direct answers, which I really very much appreciate.